Okay, so today I've got a little short video that is going to talk to you about using the window menu and moving palettes and things like that around. And also we're going to talk about shortcuts. So this is really just to make things easier for you when you're doing various things in Photoshop. And it'll be true in some of the other things like InDesign, Illustrator, Animator, and such. Okay, so under the window menu, you'll notice there are a lot of windows. And you don't need all the windows open all the time, but there are certain windows that you probably might need to open occasionally. So, for example, one is the history window. So this is the history window. And what the history window does is it allows me to back up and go forward. So for example, if I decide I want to move this to the bottom down here, like that, and then I turn off the lamp, like that, and then I decide I want to change the color of the lion to red, right, and then I'm going to use my paint bucket, right, to change, whoops, undo. Okay, so here's one place where you can use the history palette. So I can undo this paint bucket that I just did by simply clicking on the previous entry in the list, right, and now I can make sure this is not contiguous, and there we go. So I can paint him that color, and I can paint the rest of a different color like that. Okay, and then I can even bring in a new object or something. Anyways, what you see is that I can always go back up the chain all the way back to the beginning if I want, or just one move back or two moves back, right? I can always do that and undo any of the changes, the permanent changes. And when I say permanent, they're not really permanent, right? So that's the history palette. It allows me to undo things. Notice I can still go back to them until, right, I make a new change. So let's say, for example, I want to type something new, and I'm going to grab the blue, right, and I'm going to type maybe CTE or like career and technology education. Right, so now I just created a brand new layer, right? See how it says new type layer, right? But notice those other things are gone now. I can't go back to them. So, so that's kind of how the history palette works. And I can sort of dock this history palette somewhere I want. If I want to put it here with the properties, right? I can dock it and I can switch back between properties and history, or even down here, right? With the layers, I could go back and forth. I can change this like this, right, between layers and history, so that I can just easily go back and forth between the two. So that's how you can dock one of these palettes into this list over here. Okay, and if I want to get rid of the history palette completely, I can take it back out like this, right? I can go to Window and I can uncheck it and kind of make it go away, right? So, but if I want to keep it, I can just put it here, and I can go back and forth between my layers palette and my history palette any way I want. Okay, so anytime there's a palette you can't find, you can turn it on by checking it over here to turn it on. So, for example, the swatches palette, right? I want to turn it on. There we go. I just turned it on. If I want to go back to the colors palette, I can do that as well. Okay, so that's a real quick shortcut to do that. Let's talk about shortcuts. So, a thing that we need to talk about in shortcuts is if you want to use the shortcuts, they're very helpful sometimes when doing certain things. For example, making adjustments, right? If I was in a photo, all right, if I'm in a photo like this, right, then if I don't want to go all the way up here to image, adjustments, levels, I can just hit Control L. So on my keyboard, Control and L at the same time, right, and it brings up the levels palette. And now I can do the levels of that photograph, right? I can look at the different colors and decide how I want to move this, right? And I can easily get to the levels a lot faster than by going up here. So learning some of these shortcuts, and every tool that has a shortcut will always show you what that shortcut is, right? So you can always see these shortcuts over here on the side, right? So like Control S is save, Control Shift S is save as, undo is Control Z. So there's all these different ones that you can learn and use, and it will make doing some tasks in Photoshop a lot easier. One that I use a lot is Control A for select all and Control D for deselect. Those are just some ones that I use often that I just happen to know. Also, like Control plus and Control minus for zooming in and zooming out. Right, so if I hit Control plus, it zooms in, Control minus zooms out, and Control 0 fills the screen with the image, or at least from top to bottom. Okay. All right, so those are just some different ways, some shortcuts, and how to handle the windows and the various menus, and how to stack them and move them around. That can be useful for you when doing Photoshop.